for Pacifica Radio, May 30th, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm editorial director of Antiwar.com, and I'm the author of the book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. Find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now, going back to 2003 at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And our guest today is Dave DeCamp. He's news editor at Antiwar.com, keeping track of all the bad things happening on the planet every day. He also hosts the podcast Antiwar News. Welcome back to the show, Dave. How you doing?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks for having me back.
Very happy to have you here. So tell us all about the Rafah massacre.
Yeah, so this was this past Sunday night. Israel bombed a tent camp that was full of Palestinians, displaced from Rafah. I was in the western part of Rafah, and it was a massacre. I mean, if people saw any of the footage or pictures of the aftermath, I mean, it's some of the most horrific stuff I saw. When I first saw it, I wanted to believe that it was like fake or something, but it killed about 45 people, including, I believe, 12 women and 8 children was the count. And, you saw charred bodies, completely charred corpses being pulled out of this fire that was caused by the strike. And there was one video of a headless child, a man holding it. It was just, again, really, really horrific stuff. And Israel, initially denied it. And then they came out and said, Netanyahu called it a tragic mistake. And they're claiming that the bombs, they used the smallest bombs that they could, and it must have been secondary, other, like a weapons store that was there that started the fire. But we haven't seen any evidence of that. I know some people have said in these camps for, displaced people, there's probably generators, and it could just been fuel that sparked the fire. And it turns out Israel did this with U.S.-made bombs, which, of course, isn't a surprise because they get the majority of their weapons and bombs from the U.S. There's investigations that found it was the GBU-39 small diameter bomb. They used 2 of them. And Israel also is claiming that they didn't directly target the camp, that they hit something further away, but then the footage shows the debris, in the camp. So the U.S. is, it's like this whole idea of a red line has completely gone out the window. The White House and the State Department have made very clear that this did not cross Biden's red line, if there even is one. And they're claiming that Israel still hasn't launched a major operation or like a major ground assault into Rafah, even though Israeli tanks continue to push into the city, and about 1 million people, according to the UN, have fled. And when it comes to this, I mean, these press conferences with John Kirby are just unbelievable. One reporter, I forget his name, I wish I remembered it. I think he was with CBS. You could tell he got fed up, and he said, how many charred bodies is it going to take for Biden to reconsider, his support for Israel? And Kirby's response was that he was offended by the question. And he said, we care. We don't want to see the loss of one single innocent life. But, I mean, how are we supposed to believe that now? And then when it came out that it was an American-provided bomb, he deferred to Israel. He said, we don't know that. You could ask the Israeli military. As if there's no responsibility on the U.S. Like, they claim to care about these civilians being killed, but they're not even following up to see if Israel used their bombs in this massacre. And this one has kind of overshadowed the Israeli operations in Rafah altogether. They continue. There's been, it seems like now we're up to like a few dozen deaths per day in Gaza, mainly in Rafah, but there's also a lot going on in the north. And in the past few weeks, things have really escalated, basically since Israel captured that Rafah border crossing on May 7th.
It's Antiwar Radio. I'm talking with Dave DeCamp, news editor at Antiwar.com. And so now, can you tell us about the latest casualty rates? Am I right that after the first, say, 5 months, the rate at which people are being slaughtered had decreased. I mean, as you say, people are still being killed every day. I don't want to downplay it, but we're not at 40 and 50,000 now. We're hovering around low 30s. Is that about right?
Yeah, right now, the number from Gaza's health ministry is just over 36,000.
Okay. So
and
that's
in the
not low
first few
30s.
months, I mean, it was much the rate at which people were being killed. That was when they were dropping those 2,000-pound bombs on residential towers and stuff. So it definitely has declined. On the other hand, it's tough to know if they're counting every death and if people that are starving or dying of disease are being counted. So there's it's an estimate. There's 36,000, and that's the number. It's like I think today like 36,400, but it's starting to kind of go up more frequently now that we have this big operation in Rafah. And then there was a big thing recently. The UN put out, the number, which at the time was around 35,000. And then they put out another number that said it was around 25,000 people who were fully identified. And that caused all these stories saying that they lowered the death count, and the ratio of women and children being killed was lower than kind of the estimate that's been given. But that was clarified that there's 10,000 bodies apparently that have not been identified. And then there's still, it's not really clear if that includes people under the rubble. So I would say the 36,000 is probably the safe bet.
Can you imagine going out on a limb to say, it's a few less dead than we thought, and then you're not even right?
Yeah,
like desperate to claim the number is lower, and then no, they're just talking about the people whose names they know, not the total number of torsos.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying, we only killed 8,000 children instead of 14,000 children, and then to be wrong about that. If that's the argument you're making, it's not very good. I mean, I know it's a completely different conflict, but the Russia-Ukraine war, according to the UN estimates, around 500 children have been killed in that, which of course is horrible. But the casualties in that is way, way higher than Gaza.
Yeah, on both sides, they have somewhere to evacuate to, unlike here where it's a canned hunt for these poor people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Rafah crossing is closed. I mean, again, I know I feel like I mentioned this the last time we talked, but all this talk from the U.S. about aid and about, not going into Rafah, the Rafah border crossing is still closed. And again, what's going to happen to these million people? I know some accounts I've read of Palestinians who just fled Rafah. It's like their fifth time being displaced within Gaza. And imagine doing that with like young kids. It's just, this is the people that are suffering from this.
I saw this headline on Friday that Donald Trump says he's going to name Nikki Haley, his former UN ambassador, to an important position in the new administration if he's reelected. And then on Saturday, he told me to my face he wanted my vote. And then on Sunday, I saw a picture of Nikki Haley in Israel signing "Finish them." Of all the things, I mean, she could have just said hi from South Carolina or some kind of like also horrible thing, but it has to be the quote from the guy from, it would be way better if I still remembered his name, the bad guy from Mortal Kombat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it Kung Pao? No, Shao Kung. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I forget. But yeah, I mean, that's, Trump said, she's definitely going to have a place on our team after she came out and said she would vote for Trump. And yeah, I mean, she goes over to Israel. And this is in northern Israel, too. So is she saying finish Lebanon?
Which, by the way, I did not meet Trump, just to clarify. I was just sitting in the audience where I could actually see the guy, not just on a TV screen. That's all I meant by that.
But, I mean, that's the question. What is Haley going to be? I know there was rumors that she might be the VP. I think Trump denied those rumors, but said that she's going to have a spot.
Oh, she'll probably be National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, or something horrible like that.
Yeah, where she'll do a lot more damage than if she was VP. And Pompeo, I saw a radio interview that he did recently, and he was asked about Mike Pompeo. I think even Tom Cotton was thrown in there, and he said, "Oh yeah, all those people are going to have a place." So And this is definitely all Nikki Haley just met with Netanyahu. I mean, she's over there getting the red carpet rolled out for her. What's one thing that's interesting that I pointed out in my article about her signing that artillery shell is the Israeli member of the Knesset that she was with, this guy named Danny Danon. He's a Likud party guy. And he was the one a few months back, him and I forget the other guy's name, but someone from the Yesh Atid party, the kind of the main opposition. They penned this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that the U.S. and Western countries have to take in Palestinian refugees. I thought that was good to point out because, that's kind of red meat for like the right wingers. It's like, you see what these people want? They want to send all these refugees over to the U.S. But she really got the full treatment there. I mean, meeting with Netanyahu and all these other high level officials. So they know that she's going to be, maybe she said some things on Trump's behalf over there. We don't know exactly, and that's definitely in the calculation for Netanyahu is, you have Biden still giving Israel all this support, but Trump, the way he's been talking and just judging by his previous administration, he's not going to say, oh, you got to get more aid in. He's just going to kind of drop that facade, I think. And that's certainly factored into what Netanyahu is thinking.
Yeah. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with Dave DeCamp, news editor of Antiwar.com and host of Anti-War News. And what's this story about how they're promising 7 more months of this? Can't believe it.
Yeah, so that's Hanegbi, who is Netanyahu's national security advisor, and he said, we're going to at least be in Gaza. This is going to continue for at least another 7 months, and that brings us into 2025, and that brings us past the election. And we see what they're doing with taking over some of the territory, creating this so-called buffer zone. They have no intention of leaving. I think that's very clear. You had Benny Gantz make this big public dramatic show against Netanyahu, basically threatening to quit the war cabinet. And he, that's not going to force elections because Netanyahu will still have a majority with his coalition. But Gantz is kind of portrayed as this like moderate opposition, but he wanted Netanyahu to make all these commitments. And some of them are going to be impossible for Netanyahu to make, including one big controversy within the government is the law that they want to make all the Orthodox have to serve in the military as well. And there's people in his coalition that will not go for that. But so that was Gantz, I think, kind of did this knowing that Netanyahu wouldn't be able to agree to all his demands. But one of them was Israeli occupation, essentially annexation of Gaza, and saying that there should be like a U.S., European, Arab civilian administration alongside an Israeli security control of Gaza, which is occupation. So that's that's the opposition to Netanyahu. It's not like he's saying. Interestingly, you had Gallant recently, the defense minister, say that Netanyahu has to agree to not want a long-term military occupation. And I think that's because Gallant is the guy overseeing the war, and they have to keep going back into these areas where they supposedly clear Hamas. And I think he's thinking that that's just not feasible long-term. So, but anyway, again, like the very long-term thinking, I think that the chances of a hostage deal or a ceasefire, unfortunately, are very low too at this point.
Where do those negotiations stand?
Right now, I mean, they recently had a meeting, and there was some talk about restarting the negotiations. But as far as I know, they haven't. I don't think Hamas or Israel, because they were doing them in Egypt, I don't think they've sent negotiators. I think recently Hamas said that they were going to sit out the negotiations again until Israel withdraws from Rafah. I think they're kind of jumping. You just had the ICJ order Israel to withdraw from Rafah, so I think Hamas is kind of hoping that, that pressure might do something. But Israel, I mean, this IDF general, who is basically the military official in charge of the negotiations, was just saying recently that there's not going to be any deal under the Netanyahu government. And he was saying that as if it was a bad thing, saying that they were desperate to make a deal. So yeah, I think that just the chances are really low. And Netanyahu doesn't want to pause this. If he has to pause this thing, he doesn't care about the hostages. They're dying. That's another thing I think a lot of people aren't aware of, is that Israeli media reported like last month that probably only around 60 to 70 of the hostages are alive out of like the 113 they think are there. So yeah, I don't think Netanyahu has any interest in stopping because it'll be hard for him to restart.
And now, so what's going on with the pier and the aid?
The pier, I mean, it's just such a joke, this thing. So this pier that Biden ordered to be built, which apparently was Netanyahu's idea. He was the first one to float this idea. You see pictures of it. It essentially looks like a floating dock, and it cost $320 million to build somehow. And it's had all these problems because it can't handle.
Which, by the way, you know what? I'm sorry. We talk about billions here and billions there, but still 300 and something million for a floating dock is quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's astronomical. And you're right, because, we throw out these figures. We've sent Ukraine another 60 billion or whatever. But yeah, 320 million, you should be able to build like a huge port for that.
Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. 1, they know they need to. And 2, that means you need to, too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. Hey, y'all, you should sign up for my Substack. It's scotthortonshow.substack.com. And if you do that, you'll get the interviews a day before everybody else. But not only that, they'll be free of commercials. How do you like that? Pretty good, huh? scotthortonshow.substack.com. Hey, y'all, libertasbella.com is where you get Scott Horton Show and Libertarian Institute shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, and stickers and things, including the great Top Lobsters designs as well. See, that way it says on your shirt why you're so smart. Libertas Bella, from the same great folks who bring you ammo.com for all your ammunition needs, too. That's libertasbella.com.
Yeah, I mean, and it was just beset by all these problems. It can't handle rough weather. It can't handle winds more than 15 miles per hour, apparently. So they got it going finally after some rough weather delayed it. And then some U.S. troops working on it or working on the boat supporting it got hurt. And they didn't say what the injuries were exactly caused by, but I would guess probably what rough weather. And then you had some of the vessels supporting it kind of broke off their moorings and they ended up on the beach in Israel. And then this just happened. Basically, the thing just broke apart, and some of it ended up on the beach, and they towed it to the Israeli port. And they're saying, "Oh, we're going to repair it in a week and get it back out there." But it's like, I mean, the whole thing is just has been a disaster. I think they've gotten 41 aid trucks in with the pier, and there was no like distribution mechanism at first, so a lot of them just got kind of looted, basically. So the whole thing's been a mess. And this is something Biden did and ordered instead of pressuring Israel to open more land crossings. And there have been barely any aid trucks getting in since Israel captured Rafah. And they're saying that Egypt isn't allowing the aid in, but it's also like just the situation. Again, they could send the trucks in, and this has happened in the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is a crossing from Israel, but it's very close to Rafah. They say, "Oh, we sent 100 trucks in," but there's no one there to like take it and distribute it. So yeah, the aid situation has gotten really bad in the past few weeks.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing sounds like some crazy movie or something where they build this stupid pier and a storm destroys it. They drop these pallets of aid and kill children on the ground with them, and all of this stuff. As you say, on the other hand, they can just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, you need to reopen some border crossings, send some trucks in there," and the roads are bombed and be difficult to distribute the aid, but they could at least try to let it in there and see what happens. But how many different border crossings were there, and how many of them are closed right now, Dave?
I think there's a total of 7 from Israel into Gaza.
Uh-huh.
And there's a Kerem Shalom that was open, and then there was 2 in the north that I believe are still open, but very few trucks like the Rafah, hundreds of trucks were going through Rafah a day. And then the ones in the north, not so many. And they opened those ones in the north after Israel killed the World Central Kitchen workers. Biden basically said, all right, you got to do something here. So it goes to show that if Biden leans on them even just a little bit, they'll do it. So I believe those 2 northern ones are still open, but in the UN is saying only like a few dozen, like around 40 something or 50 something trucks have been coming through into Gaza per day. That's like been the daily average over the past few weeks, which again is nothing compared to what they could get through Rafah and everything. So and there is also, you have the settlers, because another thing that Israel agreed to after they killed the World Central Kitchen workers was to let Jordan ship aid by land through Israel, through the West Bank. And you've had the settlers, intercept those, and you see these videos of them dumping flour out and beating up the drivers. There was one picture of like an Israeli settler with a bloody Palestinian guy on the street and a truck, and it turned out it wasn't even an aid truck. And then there's reports that say that they're getting tips from the Israeli military, from the Israeli police about where these trucks are going to be. And that's totally believable when you have a guy like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the Minister of National Security, who's in charge of the Israeli police and border police and everything. So that is another thing that disrupts the aid.
And then with what kind of consequences for the Palestinian people there, do you know, as far as hunger and starvation?
I really don't know at this point, like what the scale is. I know like a few months ago, there was a few dozen people who died of malnutrition, and it was mostly children with health issues. And I saw recently that there's a few dozen children and other like young people that have other health issues, and without getting proper nutritional food, they're basically skin and bones, and some of them were going to be evacuated into Egypt for medical treatment, but since Rafah has been closed, that hasn't happened, so they're stuck. But yeah, I haven't seen, I don't know what the scale is, if people are actually dying of starvation at this point or not, but it's definitely going to have consequences, and there's tons of diseases and everything too. So it might not become clear for a while how many people died, due to the medical situation, malnutrition, and all that.
Yeah. All right. So the ICC recently, well, what exactly did they do? And then tell us the story about Mossad on the front page of Antiwar.com related to that today.
Yeah, so the International Criminal Court, they the chief prosecutor requested warrants from their court for Netanyahu and Gallant, and also for 3 Hamas leaders. So this is something that the U.S. and Israel obviously were working against. And that story that's on the front page of Antiwar.com today, that's from 972 magazine. They did kind of a joint investigation with The Guardian, and it basically found, so before what's happening in Gaza was going on, starting years ago, I believe it was for like a whole decade, that Israel was kind of spying on the ICC, and that was over their plans to investigate, alleged war crimes in the West Bank and Gaza committed by both sides. They're investigating Hamas and Israel as well. And this is something that the U.S. has tried to work against. But yeah, these reports revealed that they essentially threatened, I forget her name, but the last prosecutor for the ICC, Yossi Cohen, when he was the Mossad chief, basically threatened her and her family and said, like, you don't do anything that'll compromise the security of you and your family, was like the warning that he gave her. So yeah, they've been really working against this court for a while, but the warrants have been I don't know if they've technically been issued yet. I know the prosecutor has requested them. I'm not sure exactly how the process works, but they're going after them despite all this pressure.
Sounds like she should issue a warrant for him.
Yeah, right. I believe she was also sanctioned by the U.S. at one point. The Trump administration sanctioned the ICC because it was opening investigations into Afghanistan. And then the Biden administration lifted those sanctions. But the pressure worked because then the ICC said, oh, we're just going to investigate the Taliban and ISIS-K, not the U.S. So,
well, I'm against the ICC, but I also appreciate the double standard of the double standard here. This is supposed to be the liberal rules-based world order and all this, where we inflict. It's America as a crooked cop. Simple as that. Mm-hmm. The law applies to you by us, but it never applies to us. Yeah,
and they just backed the ICC against Putin,
right?
Like just last year.
And on some trumped up nonsense too, where anyone who, as we talked about, people on both sides evacuated out of the war zone. And they said, oh, yeah, all the children who went to the Russian side of the line were all subject to some mass kidnapping campaign or whatever, which is a total, absolute hoax. And they indicted them based on that. And then we got nothing but lectures about how seriously we were supposed to take it then. Mm-hmm. And now they indict Israel. And, it also shows absolutely what gangsters are in charge of the Israeli state. We're the head of Mossad, not like some guy you'll never see again, but the head of Mossad will tell an ICC prosecutor that, like, hey, you wouldn't want anything bad to happen to your family. I mean, presumably that means children, Mm-hmm. It's amazing that the people who have been killing children by the tens of thousands would threaten to kill some more, Dave, but I guess I believe it.
Yeah. And I mean, if there was a letter, too, that a group of Republican senators, I know it was like Mitch McConnell, Tom Cotton, I think Marco Rubio, that they sent to the ICC before the warrants came out. And that bred like a threat from mobsters, basically. They're like, we're warned. I forget exactly the wording, but if you read the letter, it's really something. And they also invoke what's known as the Hague Invasion Act that became law under George W. Bush.
Right.
That allows the U.S. to basically, if a U.S. or allied military personnel or government official is arrested and is being held by the ICC, then the U.S. can use any means necessary to free them, and they invoke that in their letter.
Well, look, I don't think any American should be prosecuted without benefit of our Bill of Rights. On the other hand, I've noticed that America never prosecutes its highest government officials for war crimes and things like this. So if we would hold them accountable, then it wouldn't be an issue of whether they were subject to arrest by some international institution. But all our war criminals get away with it, which is what raises the issue. So passing a law like that is just their guilty conscience talking. They know that they could be in the dock. After all, Rumsfeld died unable to travel to Europe because there were warrants out for his arrest for war crimes in Iraq, for example. Mm-hmm. And now real quick, we're almost out of time, but tell us what's going on in Lebanon and with the Ansar Allah Houthis in Yemen. And if you need to get into Iraq and Iran, do that too.
Yeah, so, I mean, the situation in Lebanon, we've had Jason Ditz covering it pretty much every day. I mean, it's like daily strikes across the border still. The death toll on the Lebanon side, it's around over 400 people have been killed, around 80 civilians included in that. So, and on the northern Israeli side, a few dozen people have been killed. So that continues. I mean, I don't really know what else to say about it besides that. We see Gallant recently made another threat about a big escalation there and said that the Lebanese people would pay the price if there was an escalation. So that just continues. There's always the risk of it turning into something bigger, but it still hasn't so far. The Houthis, I mean, they just claimed the other day that they downed another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone, and there was footage of it that they released, and you can see pictures of it in the desert. And the U.S. hasn't confirmed all of the times that the Houthis claim to down one of these drones. But if this is true, this is the sixth time that they downed an MQ-9 since this past November. So that's a lot. I mean, they're about 30 million apiece. So that adds up after a while. And they're still hitting ships. It's tough to really figure out what exactly is going on. It seems like they fire missiles and drones at ships, and then they come out and announce that they landed these direct strikes, but usually it turns out that they didn't. But like just the other day, they said that they targeted 6 different ships all over the place in the Mediterranean, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea. and then only one of those ships reported that it was hit. So that continues. It looks like the U.S. has pulled back on the bombing campaign a bit because it wasn't really working. We haven't seen as many U.S. airstrikes in Yemen. They're still intercepting Houthi drones and missiles and stuff. So that's the situation there. They still don't show any sign of backing down, the Houthis.
All right, we're out of time. Thanks very much for your time again on the show, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for having me.
All right, you guys, that is the great Dave DeCamp. He's our news editor at Antiwar.com. That's news.antiwar.com for everything, every day, all the time. And also listen to his great podcast every morning. It's called Antiwar News. And that's it for Antiwar Radio for today. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm editorial director at Antiwar.com, and you can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now, going back to 2003, all there for you at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.